greatly regrets not being able to take part in the peace talks.
Early November was sort of the crowning blow. To have his own ally balking was certainly not, did not leave a good taste in his mouth.
With the peace initiative dead in the water, Nixon forged ahead of Humphrey in the polls. But he feared that LBJ could still rob him of victory by going public with his suspicions. That evening, Nixon called Johnson to deny all personal involvement and insist that Anna Chennault must be working on her own initiative. The election was now only hours away. America went to the polls. The result was close enough for Vietnam to have been a decisive factor.
They massively interfered in an international negotiation on the eve of an election to influence it in their favor. They succeeded. And when you look at the result, Nixon winning by 499,000 votes, there's little doubt that that shifted enough votes at the end to save the election for Nixon.
Having lost a close one 8 years ago and having won a close one this year, I can say this: winning's a lot more fun.
When he knew he had won and he was tired, he had been up for probably almost 24 hours following the results. President-elect Nixon at that time is almost in disbelief. He had to really grab a hold of the fact that finally he had achieved the goal of the presidency of the United States.
After the election, Nixon met with LBJ. Johnson decided he could not blow the whistle on Nixon by going public with the secret wiretaps. Instead, he may have used them to, in effect, blackmail the new president.
It is quite probable that President Johnson, in his own blunt way, told President Nixon that he had the goods on him, and that he hoped sincerely that President Nixon would continue his policies, particularly in trying to further the peace talks.
That I can confirm, you see. Because of that, Nixon became more careful in handling the problem of Vietnam.
If progress is to be made on matters like Vietnam,
as LBJ looked on, Nixon jettisoned all the promises he had made privately to the South Vietnamese.
The current administration is setting forth policies that will be carried forward by the next administration. And the point that
Within a week, he wanted me to go to Vietnam to persuade to go to the Paris peace talk. And I had such feeling that we're being betrayed, that how could you do this to so-called a friend who helps you to win the elections?
January the 20th, 1969, was one of the proudest days in Nixon's life. It was the day of his inauguration. In his speech, he pledged that the keystone of his presidency would be peace.
This honor now beckons America, the chance to help lead the world at last out of the valley of turmoil and onto that high ground of peace that man has dreamed of since the dawn of civilization. The greatest honor history can bestow is the title of peacemaker.
Down the years, it's been possible for Nixon loyalists to suggest that it may have been done by people close to Nixon, but not Nixon himself. Reading the new FBI releases, it is very difficult to sustain that argument.
A full 6 months had passed before Nixon met the man he had double-crossed. He finally met President Thieu on the Pacific island of Midway.
We expected to have a real summit meeting dealing with the overall aspects of the war, the enemy. Instead of that, we had a very short meeting in a faraway island for, let's say, a few hours during a day. It is up to other people to use the word betrayal, but there was a very sour feeling in our heart about the Americans.
Richard Nixon had always been a hawk on Vietnam. Richard Nixon was probably the first politician ever to suggest that the Americans went into Vietnam. When Nixon became president, it became very clear to the South Vietnamese very quickly that now that he'd won, now that he'd got what he wanted and was president, that Nixon wanted out of Vietnam as fast as he could.
The whole series of events created a debt from Nixon to Thieu, and Thieu, in effect, could say to Nixon, look, I helped you when you needed me. Don't you tell me what to do.
Vietnamese intransigence made peace elusive, and the war dragged on for another 4 years. Nixon's decision to play politics with peace cost many thousands of lives, Vietnamese and American. Here, in the Lyndon Johnson Library in Austin, Texas, some key evidence of Nixon's plot is sealed in an envelope that is marked with an X. Much of it was obtained through wiretaps, and their contents have mostly never been disclosed.
Well, President Johnson asked me to seal this envelope and to mark it not to be opened until 50 years. It touches on the fact that there are certain things that are done by the government for national security reasons. The fact that this was the mixing of national security techniques with domestic politics was what was wrong.
Nixon learned that a file on the bombing halt had been lodged at the Brookings Institute in Washington. Nixon might well have feared that the file was potentially incriminating because it could contain information on what he did to undermine the peace talks. Nixon wanted the file, and what he did to get it may have set him on the road to Watergate and the destruction of his presidency. A conversation, tape recorded in the Oval Office, finds President Nixon, Henry Kissinger, and Bob Haldeman discussing the file kept in the Brookings Institute.
I wouldn't be surprised if Brookings had the file.
The bombing halt is on the same file, or in some of the same hands. Do we have it? I've asked for it. You said you didn't have it. We can't.
We had nothing here, Mr. President.
And I asked for that because I need to contact, get in and get those files.
Less than 2 weeks later, President Nixon is heard asking Haldeman and Kissinger if Brookings has been broken into yet.
We are going to use any means. Is that clear? Did they get the Brookings Institute raided last night? No. Get it done. I want it done. I want the Brookings Institute say, clean out.
Such is the intensity with which he wants the stuff, says he wants the stuff, and demands a break-in in order to get hold of it, that one has to surmise that the reason he wanted it is because he was afraid that his own role in interfering with the peace talks would be revealed in the files.
One afternoon, a wide-eyed member